Okay, we ended last week about 80% through, maybe 90% through, explaining the traditional view of conscience and what weak and strong mean. And I ended last week thinking I will go back and finish that up. But it's kind of getting long, so I'm going to go straight to my view, which means we're going to leave a few things uncovered in the traditional view. But today I've got 40 minutes to explain my view. So, ready, go. Okay, we're going to fill out this chart again. You may have, if you want the last set of handouts so that you can fill out the chart along with, we have a couple more. So, maybe you can distribute. I'm not sure if they're collated very well or not.
That's worksheet 6.
That's worksheet 5, 6, 7, 8, and the two charts, the traditional view chart and the my view chart. Okay, so back to the chart on the screen. We're going to fill out this chart again, but according to my view. So going through this chart, you will see what I see it means to be weak and strong. Yeah. All right, so the key aspect to my view, and to understanding it very simply, is that weak means unable. So again, we've got these, if you weren't here last week, we've got these, each one of these is kind of a person thinking about an issue. So here is a red light on this issue. So this person's conscience is saying, stop, don't do it. So if they did it, they would feel guilty about it. Okay? The little triangle underneath is either a good biblical base, which is a golden triangle, or a not very good biblical base, which is the ugly brown triangle. We said last week in the traditional view that weakness, it was defined as theological immaturity or theological poor understanding. So that would be the brown bases, okay, especially this one with the no. The key to my view is that the word weak refers to a conscience inability to do something. So it's when your conscience says no, don't do it, then you're weak. Okay? So it goes like this. These two are weak. And these two are strong. Which means that it doesn't really matter to whether you're weak or strong, how good your biblical basis is. You can have a really great biblical basis and be weak, and you can have a poor biblical basis and be strong. Okay? So, the next question we asked was, is he right to obey his conscience? And that's yes, yes, yes for these. This guy is actually no, because keep in mind, he has a poor biblical basis. His conscience says, go ahead, green light, but his biblical basis for that view is not good. Okay? So he should. So in a sense, he should not obey his conscience, but his conscience does still say go ahead. And so because his conscience says go ahead, he's strong. Okay? I know that's different than what you may have thought before. So should he obey Romans 14 commands? That's yes, all the way across. Okay? And does this person self-identify? Yes, all the way across. So let me show you how simple my view gets. And when we apply this view, so in a few weeks, once we understand it, we'll apply it. And it's going to be really simple to apply it. Because everybody realizes who they are. And they know whether they're weak or strong.
Except for the brown and the green one.
He knows he's strong, though. He knows he can do it. So strong, in my nomenclature, strong in naming, mine strong means able. Conscience able. So this person, his conscience says, yeah, go ahead. So he's able to do the thing without self-condemnation. Should he be? Well, that's another question. Okay, so this one, which I know looks confusing, is both views together in one chart. And there's the point I want to make is that there's some differences and there's some similarities. So all these check marks are similarities. Okay? There's three main objections that come to my view from the traditional camp. And you may already be thinking about it, and we kind of already heard one of them. This is a big one. Because this guy over here has a good biblical basis, right? He's theologically informed, and yet I'm calling him weak, which seems a little strange, probably. And then this guy, on the other hand, has a bad biblical basis. He's theologically uninformed, and yet I'm calling him strong. Okay, so those two probably seem a little strange. The next one is the question of whether the terms weak and strong can be used the way I'm using them. And then the third one is the differences down here, which mainly revolve around this right here. Does he self-identify? Okay.
Self-identify again is...
As weak. In other words, this guy, if we look at the traditional view, in this box, we said that this guy is weak. But we realize that the vast majority of the time, he's not going to realize he has a bad biblical basis. He's going to think he's strong. So the two brothers can't approach him the same way as he approaches himself. We'll get back to it. Okay, so let's go first to just number 1. Okay, so go to Romans 14. And if you did worksheet 1, pull out worksheet 1. Because your answers on worksheet 1 will be helpful to you. So raise your hand if you did worksheet 1, and you'll have an answer for me. Okay. What did you put for question number 12 on worksheet 1? It's on the second page of worksheet 1. It was a few weeks ago. Question 12. Did you put?
Yeah, I got it.
What'd you put?
Me first?
If you want to.
I don't want to.
Don't want to.
I'm a weak brother.
If he gets started, he won't shut up, so you better
No,
take
you-
something else first. Sorry, that was really disrespectful.
It's true, though.
So, any answer
She
for
has
question
knowledge.
12 on worksheet 1? Maybe I'm dreaming. The question was, where in Romans 14 does Paul tell the weak brother to grow stronger?
Nowhere.
Yeah, that's my answer, is nowhere. Now, some people will say, well, he called him weak. Obviously, nobody wants to be weak, so obviously Paul wants him to be stronger. But that is based on what you think weak means, which is the thing we're discussing in the first place.
What about the passage where he says, where I am weak, he is strong? Isn't there some biblical idea of actually making yourself weak or wanting to be weak? Or
I have questioned whether that use of weak in 2 Corinthians is the same sense of weakness as here. I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it could be. It's kind of a quick passage there, and I'm just not sure the answer. So there's not enough context to be sure. All right, well, let's look at Romans 14. One person, verse 5, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. So, what I want you to see here in verse 5 is that Paul charges each brother to be fully convinced. And if you read on, you see in verse 6, I've underlined, the one who observes the day, that's a weak thing to do because he has to observe Sabbath day, observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats is a strong thing to do, eats in honor of the Lord. The one who abstains from eating, abstains in honor of the Lord. So I want you to see that for both, there's a couple things. One, in verse 5, he locates the conviction in the mind. So he says, each one of you should be fully convinced in his own mind. And second, he follows the statement about being fully convinced with the fact that each one serves according to his conviction. Do you see that? So it's not just that he has that he's convinced of something, but he does what he's convinced of. So if he's convinced it's okay to eat, he eats. Do you see that? So you can't say, well, I'm weak because I can't, in my heart, I just can't accept that it's okay to eat this, even though I know in my head that it's fine. I feel like it's wrong, but I know it's okay. In Paul's writing, convinced in the mind is a position that leads to an action consistent with what you're convinced of. Does that make sense? Which means that in the end, the strong really only needs to know his view. That the meat is okay to eat. Whereas the weak needs to understand both. He needs to understand what he's convinced of himself, which is that he should not eat, and he needs to understand that the strong is okay not to eat. Therefore, he doesn't judge him. So it's kind of required for the weak to understand both, even though the strong really only needs to understand his position. So now we're going to turn to 1 Corinthians 8.
Why doesn't the strong have to understand both so that he doesn't despise the
He
weaker
kind of
brother?
does too. Yeah. But he cannot despise, he can kind of obey not despising without really understanding why. Right? Whereas the weak,
The
he's
judgment. Yeah.
he's facing sins that the other guy might be committed, which we're required to rebuke one another, and non-sin actions that he thinks are sin. And he's got to discern the difference between those. And in order to do that, he has to understand the okayness for his brother. All right, so turn to 1 Corinthians 8. Your worksheet, I think it's worksheet 2, should have helped you think through this passage. But we are going to read through 8 and 10 and make sense of them. So, verse 1, 1 Corinthians 8. Now, concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. So right off the bat, Paul is connecting the matter of idol food to knowledge, right? And we're going to see that knowledge is connected to this issue through both of these chapters. But right away, he makes two warnings about knowledge. Okay, the first one is knowledge puffs up, right? So he's saying your claim to knowledge can make you arrogant. Second, he warns, if anyone imagines that he knows, what? Something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. So the warnings are, number one, you're arrogant, and number two, you think you know, but you don't quite know as you ought to know. Okay? So let's follow this knowledge through this chapter. We go on to verse 4. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know, so now we're going to find out what the knowledge is. We know that an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. Okay? So that's the answer to the strong side on worksheet 2, question 5. If you have that with you. The strong have two pieces of knowledge. One, the idol is nothing. if you have King James, or the idol has no real existence, if you have ESV like the screen. And 2, there is no God but one. I skipped a little bit here. It's actually really neat as a side note because it's important for talking about the deity of Jesus, because here Paul takes the Shema, right? So this is the Israeli statement, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." This is maybe the most important statement in the history of the world. And he takes this statement and he changes it to include Jesus. So this is a really important passage looking at the deity of Christ. And actually Romans 14 is too, because there Jesus and God get transferred back and forth in terms of who is Lord. Okay, so next he says, however, not all possess this knowledge. So now he's kind of switching and he's going to talk about the one who doesn't possess the knowledge. So I'm going to skip ahead and stick with the, consistently we'll stick with the guy who has the knowledge and talk about him. And then we'll go back and to 7. So the next time knowledge shows up is verse 10. Verse 10 starts with the word for, which means it's logically connected to verse 9. So we'll consider 9 and 10 together. But in 10, it says, you who have knowledge, eating in an idol's temple. Right? It says, for, if anyone sees you who have knowledge, eating in an idol's temple. So what else do we learn about the knowledge? What is the conclusion of the knowledge in terms of what the knower can do?
And damage the other person.
He can. He can encourage the other person to eat, yep. But primarily for himself, what is it that he can do? He can eat in the temple, right? Do you see that? For if anyone who sees you who have knowledge eating in the idol's temple. So it's important that we understand that the controversy here is about eating in the temple versus not eating in the temple. Paul says in verse 9, and this is the one that leads into 10, verse 9, but take care that this right of yours, which is what? Does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you have knowledge eating in the idol's temple, those are connected. So the right is the eating in the temple. And right is a word that means liberty, right, authority. It means that they claim the right to do this. Okay, following so far? All right, let's go back and talk about the other guy. He's weak, right? Obviously, he's on the other side of the issue. We'll find he can't eat in the temple. Verse 7 says, however, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. So why can't he eat in the temple?
His conscience.
Yes, his conscience?
He thinks the idol is, he's eating because of the idol. There's a correlation there.
Yeah, it says he eats the food as really offered to an idol.
Yeah.
What about his association with idols? If he, obviously, this is a Gentile.
Yes. Yeah, so on your worksheet, there's one of the questions is, what's the nationality of the weak and the strong? They're both Gentile in this passage.
So is it similar to, like, before I got saved, I listened to a lot of heavy metal music, and I think it's fine. There's no scriptural sin issue with someone listening to.
Well, that would be
Zeppelin.
similar. That would be similar, at least in the respect of former association.
Right, so I have former associations with things that are laid out as sin in the Bible, and I just say I'm weak when I hear stuff like that. It's just...
Well, let me ask you this about it. Does the weak here see eating idol meat in the temple as sin?
It says he is defiled.
Yes. It says he's defiled, which means what? He feels he's made himself dirty if he eats. So clearly he thinks it's sin, which teaches us a little bit more about the thinking of the weak.
But if I take my thing with heavy metal, okay?
Yeah.
Even if I occasionally put it on to 107, I know it defiles me, but I know if someone else, it's not a sin issue. I know, like, I'm a weak brother, but I know it's not a sin issue. It's just it's weak on my conscience.
I would almost argue that a lot of
So you
music
feel
is
you're
a sin
defiled,
issue.
like this
Yeah,
guy?
but I know it's not sin.
But you're defiled or
Right.
not?
Yeah,
You
I'm
think
def-
you've sinned or you think you've not sinned?
Because I've sinned against my conscience, not because eating food to an idol or listening to Led Zeppelin is a sin. Is that what you're saying?
Well, let's stick with this example, because in this example, it's much more concrete as to what's going on. That one we'll apply this to later, maybe. But here, this weak person sees eating in the temple as defiling.
And as a direct disobedience of a universal command.
He sees it as sin. He sees it as defiling.
So you're saying he sees it as sin when others do it as well? Is that?
Well, let's just talk about what it says. It says that if he eats it as food really offered, and their conscience being weak is defiled. He himself, his conscience is defiled. He self-condemns. So that's what we've learned about him so far. He thinks it's sin. I'm not sure we can say from the passage whether he thinks it's intrinsically sin or sin by his...
And two, it sounds like he ate meat offered to idols as a sinful, idolatrous religion before he became saved.
Yeah.
And so, to him, he was sinning when he was eating the food offered to idols. Before he was saved, he was really, and so,
He looks back at his former actions as
Yeah.
sin. Yeah, sure.
and it would have been sin if he was eating.
Okay, one question, but I gotta go fast because only 40 minutes. Oh, 15 minutes? Okay,
We need longer Sunday school classes.
I guess.
Romans 14:23, but whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith.
Yeah, this guy does not have faith to eat, so he condemns if he eats. Yeah, and here, it's in the temple. Okay, I'm gonna start going faster because we only have 15 minutes. But the second thing that I want to point out that we learn about the weak here is that the weak is also a monotheist. The weak believes that there is only one God worthy of worship. Do you see that? Because if he didn't, he would say, well, go ahead, eat in the temple. The idols are real. Worship them. And then on Sunday, come and worship God. Worship them both. But he doesn't say that. He says, no, this is sin, worshiping those. Worshiping God is good. Okay? So, for worksheet number 2.
But doesn't the knowledgeable one think that there's only one God as well?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Right. So both of them agree there's only one God. What they disagree over is the reality of the idol. The strong, the knower one here, says an idol has no real existence. An idol is nothing. Right? So what's sacrificed to it is offered to nothing. I can eat what's offered to nothing. Right? So let me go on and just kind of summarize that really plainly. So the weak believes the Shema? Yes. What does he believe about an idol? It exists. It is real. What does he believe about eating in the temple? No. Okay, how about the strong? Shema? Yes. Idol?
No.
Nothing. And eat in the temple? Sure, why not? Okay.
Dan, what's the Shema?
It is Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. It is, so the word means hear. Shema means hear. It's short for, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Or the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
So he's a monotheist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that means, yep,
Said he thought the idol was real,
yes.
but he not any longer though, right?
He does.
Still thinks it's real.
Yeah, so if you look in 8, is it verse 4? No, 7, right? If he eats it as really offered.
Or at least 1 Corinthians 10.
Now he believes.
It's kind of based on his former associations, but he still would eat it now as really offered. Yeah.
Or at least the demon that animates the idol.
Yeah, that is certainly an Old Testament teaching, and he probably would have been taught that. Okay, 1
So,
Corinthians
If a
10.
demon animates the idol, it's not nothing. So the
Well,
strong is wrong.
you would say so.
Who would say so? The strong?
Well, the weak would make that point.
Right, yeah.
But demons haven't come up yet in chapter 8, so I didn't bring them up. All right, you ready to go to 10?
Yeah.
So, Paul's argument through these 21 verses is so well crafted that really I just need to read it. But as I do, I want you to think about the weak and the strong from chapter 8. Okay? The strong is going there, he's eating in the temple, he's justifying what he's doing by the fact that the idol's not real anyway, so he doesn't care. Okay? And the weak is telling him, stop that. But it's socially very useful to go to these assemblies in the temple and hobnob, right? All right, so let's head through 1 Corinthians 10. For I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So that's the bull, right? That's worshiping the bull. All right, so go down. Now, these things took place as an example for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Therefore, I'm skipping to 12. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So somebody in Paul's audience is getting a warning here. They think they're doing okay, but really, he's saying, take heed, because you might be sinning, falling. Okay, moving down. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not participation in the blood of Christ? The bread that we break, is it not participation in the body of Christ? Skipping. We who are many are one body, for we all partake of one bread. So the warning here is that Paul is telling his audience that somebody is flirting with or committing idolatry. So he's saying, flee from idolatry. Chapter 8, or verse 18, consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? In other words, in the Old Testament, the priest put things on the altar and burned them. And then you ate that. And that made you a participant in the sacrifice that occurred where you weren't. A little bit away from you.
You're talking about Jews.
Jews,
Yeah,
yes.
Jewish sacrifice.
Yep. All right, verse 19. What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything? Does that
Nothing.
spark any remembrance from chapter 8? Am I implying that food offered to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I left out the no because it's not there in Greek. If you want, we can have a long conversation about whether it belongs or not. The point I want to make about 19 is that Paul is obviously expecting in 19 that 1 through 18 has made the strong brother, the temple eater guy, start to get really uncomfortable, right? Because he's hammering against idolatry, and he's hammering the idea that participation in something is real participation in whatever it is, okay? So Paul knows the strong are going to make a protest. And what is that? The strong have been saying their knowledge, which is the idol is nothing. And now he's saying, wait, and they're going to say, wait a minute, are you saying an idol is something? Do you see that? And the weak are probably kind of going, yeah. Do you see that? And here's how he ends this section. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. So if we flip back to this that we filled out, does Paul believe the Shema? Yes. And how about an idol?
It's nothing.
Real or nothing? Nothing?
No, it's participation with demons.
Any other? And does anyone think that Paul says an idol is real? Yeah, he says it's demons. Yep. Yeah. So my answer is yes. Paul says it's real.
Well, except he switched. He's introduced a new term. It's no longer idol, it's demon. And demons are real, but idols are not.
An idol can be a demon. The devil or a demon can be an idol. Anything being worshipped besides God is considered an idol.
Yeah, demons. So the demonic presence behind idols is an Old Testament Septuagint word to talk about idolatry along with demons. Paul goes straight from his argument about participation to the really emphatic argument about demons being present. But the demons aren't even really necessary for the participation to be meaningful, right? If I make something that I worship, it doesn't really matter if there's a demon behind it. If I worship it, it's wrong. And the question is going in the temple and eating worship? That's why the participation thing is so important. Paul says that when we take communion, we participate in the body and blood of Christ, which is his sacrifice. He's not being sacrificed again. But we are, by taking, we are accepting the sacrifice in a sense. We're participating in it. We're acknowledging that it was for us. Does that make sense? And so to go and eat is participation in what the ceremony entails, which for the pagans is idol worship. Steve?
In this chapter, I'm struggling to see the strong and weak people here that we have so clearly in 8 and then also 14.
You're struggling to see them labeled such.
No, I don't see the strong. I see an issue of sin and wickedness. I don't see this, because this is a person who's not just going and eating meat because their friend asked them. This is someone who's going and is tempted or participating in idolatry. As in the tip,
but
as in the type.
They did go because their friends asked them, and because they asked their friends.
But that's not the references in the Old Testament weren't just because, oh, I'm being invited to go do this. These people actually were worshiping these calves and the golden calves, and
Sure.
These people actually bowed down to the snake on the stick. And so do you see my point? I'm struggling with the weak and strong. I see more sin and obedience here.
Good.
Kind of a similar,
Good.
but it's not the weak and strong.
But this is the exact issue. This is
But
exactly
it's
the issue of
carrying it
chapter
into
8.
sin, and it's But there is a chapter in between it too, so I mean.
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of issues in between it, which will.
So you say it's in context exactly with what they're talking about in.
I want to go,
1
yeah, let me go back, because I want to, okay, so the last thing is that Paul in the end said no to temple idol meat. So real quick, I want to show you some neat stuff from 1 Corinthians 10. Maybe we'll answer some of the issue of connecting 10 to 8. I've tried through this process to not constantly be saying, look at this Greek word. And the reason is because I want you to see that this whole discussion is right here in our English Bible. Right? I think it's great to study Greek, but we should read our English Bibles and trust them. However, I do want to show you a few things in Greek. So, this first line, for I want you to know brothers. The word I want you to see here is agnoin. It is, so here, this is in Greek, and I left the order in the Greek order, so it would read to them, not I want, but you not know, brothers.
This is why we
So,
read English.
this but is the for, right? So he's beginning a section with, but let's talk about idols, right? Again, and let's talk about knowledge. And he's saying something about not knowing. And this word, agnoin, is related to the word for knowledge that we had in chapter 8. So still, knowledge is important. Paul started chapter 8 talking about knowledge and gave some warnings. You're arrogant and you think you know, but you don't really know. And now in chapter 10, he's saying, you need to know something more. So now he's filling in the gap of the lack of knowledge that the strong have. Do you see that? And then the next 21 verses completely refute the idea of eating in the temple. And there he refutes the knowledge item of the strong, which is that the idol is nothing. It's not nothing because people worship it. And he refutes the conclusion of the strong, which is that you can just go eat in the temple. So this is important because in the traditional view, remember, you will hear that the strong are strong because they have knowledge. But here, in these chapters, it's the opposite. If you really read 10, remembering what happened in 8. So I think the reason people don't see that is because 8 was 2 chapters ago, and they've forgotten what the issue in 8 was. But here the strong are strong because they lack knowledge. They lack the knowledge of the weak. Do you see that? And then the next one is verse 12. This one I'll go really quick on. Take heed. Anyone thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall. Standing and falling is the same thing. So this connects us kind of back to Romans 14. Where standing and falling was the issue between those brothers. Okay. Okay, this one maybe is my favorite. Verse 21. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord. So in Greek, this reads, not you can the cup of the Lord drink. And this word, this is the word I want to look at here, dunaste. It's translated you can, and most of the time it's translated can, but its root is dunamai. Does anyone know what dunamai means?
Able.
Able. That would be kind of the same as can. What? Two-sided. Power. I don't know the two-sided. Power. It means power. What else?
Be possible.
Be possible.
Could, may, be of power. Can do.
Are you reading the whole list?
Sure, I'm looking at my Strongs right now.
It's not listing all, that's all. So, dunamai and dunamis are strength.
Did you say strength or straight?
Strength. Are strong. This is a verb, so it would be are strong. Okay? If you translate this as strong, are strong, instead of can, then it reads like this. Not you are strong, the cup of the Lord to drink, and the cup of demons. Which means Paul is coming to the end of his big lesson about eating in the temple. And he's saying to the strong, really, stop it. You're not strong. Do you see that? That's pretty much all I have time for this week. I still have 5 more slides. Let's see, where did I want to go from here? Oh yeah, just this. Yep.
So the distinction is eating meat in the temple specifically?
The argument, the issue, was eating in the temple in 8 and the first part of 10. Now, at the end of 10, he talks about eating in the market. So, different scholars have said different things about trying to deal with the difference between 8 and 10. Because in 8, he says, the weak don't eat in the temple, right? And then in 10, he says, don't eat in the temple. So it sounds like he's saying the opposite. If you take weak to mean theologically uninformed. And so some people say, well, obviously then, 1 Corinthians is multiple letters. Paul changed his mind, but not in the middle of one letter. He actually wrote a bunch of letters, and then they were kind of all letters to Corinth, so the Corinthian church just stuck them together into one letter. I don't think that makes sense. And I think if you look at how knowledge connects back and forth, and the issues do, and plus the warnings that Paul gives at the beginning of 8, he's not totally happy with the knowledge of the strong. He says, you think you know, but you don't know as you ought to know. And then when he talks about their right to eat in the temple, he says, this right of yours. And the way I see that is he's saying, you claim this right. You don't really have it, but you claim it. So the other people don't have it. Okay, there was more to talk about. We'll talk about it next week. And then also next week, we're going to kind of move forward into how to apply this. But let me warn you that just because I've explained and hopefully satisfied the idea that you can be strong in the sense that you're able to do something and yet be wrong. So hopefully that satisfies that strong has to be viewed as just the ability to do something in faith. You still have a lot of aspects of the traditional view in your mind. And as we go through it, we're going to talk about those.
So Dan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm strong, I can do something,
Okay.
and I'm wrong. Biblically speaking, I'm wrong.
So I don't know you're wrong, but Jesus knows you're wrong.
Jesus knows I'm wrong. I think I'm right. I'm convinced.
Okay.
I'm fully persuaded that I can do this thing.
Mhm.
It's biblically wrong, but I'm fully convinced. Am I right in obeying my conscience? I might be sinning, but am I right to obey my conscience?
Well, yeah, okay, so I get what you're saying. And there's a sense in which all you've got is your conscience, right?
Yeah.
All you've got is your assessment. So you will obey your conscience, and in a sense you ought to. But because you have not trained your conscience properly with the Word, you really shouldn't. It'd be better if you were obeying something else.
But my culture has taught me that this thing is okay, and I don't know that scripturally it's wrong, and I'm going to obey my conscience. My conscience has been trained to say, yes, I can do this thing. That is, ultimately, God knows it's sin.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's better to obey my conscience in that sense.
Your
than
conscience
go
was
and that's
trained
all-
by your culture then.
That's
Whatever,
also
and
why
not by the word.
in my so this yes with a question mark is the same thing for the weak guy, right? So this second row weak guy has a bad biblical basis for not thinking he can do something. So should he obey his conscience? Well, yes, because his conscience is his assessment of what's right and wrong. But he needs to train his conscience, and he might need to open it up. This was Paul at the beginning of his vision. So God says, kill and eat. Brings down all these animals. And says, kill and eat. Peter, yes, it was Peter. And Peter says what? No way. I have never eaten that stuff. That's Paul. Or that's Peter. Right? But God changed him really in a hurry. And moved him from where? From here to where? To here. To good biblical basis. Actually, he had God's word like directly to him, which is kind of impressive. And then he thought he could do it, and he went right out and ate with Gentiles.